Well, of course, they concern us here in Israel, but we're not surprised because the UN, unfortunately, while it has an aura of purity around the world, the reality is the majority of countries at the United Nations are not democracies. The majority of countries are dictatorships. They're not one person, one vote. So it's hardly surprising when we are constantly attacked at the United Nations. If it was a family of nations of democracies and of freedom-loving countries, then we'd be more concerned. But we've grown used here in Israel, unfortunately, to the incessant bias from the United Nations. But it does concern us, of course.
Sorry, the countries of the United Nations aren't democracies. I'm trying to get my head around that. What, Canada, France, Australia, what do you mean by that?
I'm saying the majority of countries which make up the United Nations, the majority are not democracies. There's a reason why this country is condemned. This tiny country of Israel is condemned more than any other state on earth at the United Nations, more than the big offenders, the big human rights offenders. There's a reason why. It's because there is an inherent majority against Israel at the United Nations.
Okay, I feel like we could talk about that side of things for quite some time, but I want to ask you about the current situation in Gaza, because I note these comments from Benjamin Netanyahu that Hamas will not rule Gaza after the war has ended. Those remarks a short time ago. I mean, how will Israel ensure that? What's the plan?
Well, one of our main objectives in this war against Hamas is to make sure that they can no longer be a threat to this country, their military means and their governing capabilities as well. And of course, we've got 101 of our hostages still in Hamas captivity. Amongst them are 13 women, 2 of them are children, the Bibas children. It's a travesty that they're still haven't been freed, and we're not going to rest until all of those people are home, our 101 hostages. You know, I tell you, Thomas, this war could be over this afternoon. You mentioned the United Nations and their resolution calling for an end to the conflict. We too want this conflict to end. Gazans are not going anywhere. Israelis are not going anywhere. But we need to get our hostages home. If we had them all home, and if Hamas surrendered, this war would be over immediately. So Hamas need to be destroyed for a better future for Israelis and, of course, for Palestinians as well.
I mean, what's the end game here, though? Because some would say this game of whack-a-mole at a terrible cost to innocent Palestinians just doesn't seem sustainable.
It isn't sustainable. We don't want to be fighting this war one moment more than we have to, but we have to destroy this terrorist organization. They've made a very clear objective to destroy my country, to carry out October the 7th again if it has the opportunity. We won't leave them standing in Gaza. We won't allow them to regroup and to retake Gaza. That's what will happen if this war ends. They need to surrender for a better future for Gazans. You know, Hamas won't be happy. They won't rest until the last Gazan is killed. We're stopping that from happening by going after Hamas. We're getting civilians out of harm's way. It's extremely important. No other country has fought a war the way that we have fought it. We get civilians out of harm's way, and we're going after the terrorists, and we will win. But Hamas will not be standing at the end of this conflict.
With due respect, getting civilians out of harm's way, surely you don't deny the extraordinary civilian death toll we've been hearing about in recent times. A lot of them are not out of harm's way.
Well, this is the way that Hamas wanted to fight this war. I mean, this is precisely what they wanted. Hamas are not upset at the death toll. They wish it was 10 times more. And of course, none of us should be taken in by these Hamas figures, which are grossly inflated. They are, no one should be surprised as well that an organization, a terrorist organization that massacred our people, that raped our women and our men, that murdered our children, that burned families in front of their parents in front of their kids and kids in front of their parents. None of us should be surprised that they inflate their figures as well. So the figures which are quoted by international media, we don't believe they are correct. We know that, for instance, Sinwar himself, the leader of Hamas, is counted amongst the figures of Gazan dead. You're right. He should be counted up, but they don't isolate the terrorists which have been killed. And we know that we have killed tens of thousands of terrorists, but we will not stop this war until we get our people home and Hamas are destroyed.
You don't think that the number of civilian casualties in Gaza, and okay, you debate the numbers, but I mean, I will note these numbers have been analysed by many external to Hamas. I mean, you don't deny that in a way undermines Israel's war goal of defeating Hamas?
Well, of course, every civilian death is a catastrophe. But this was the way that Hamas designed this war. What did they think was going to happen when they sent a terrorist army across our border to massacre our people and then hide amongst their own civilians? I mean, that's the way they designed this war. There's a reason why they developed this terrorist tunnel network under schools, under mosques, under hospitals. It was so it would draw Israel's fire against their own people. We've tried our hardest to get civilians out of harm's way. No one in the world, in the history of urban warfare, has taken the steps that this country has taken. Of course, it's a ridiculous question, Thomas. We don't want one civilian to be killed, whether Israeli or Palestinians. But of course, Hamas have designed the war this way, and we've got no other choice but to destroy this organization so we can begin a better future on both sides of the Gazan border. Because as I said, Gazans are not going anywhere and Israelis are not going anywhere. But a future without Hamas is a better future.